All right, my name is Cherry Kubota. I'm chairing this open discussion with Dr. Ray Lira from NASA. Actually, you are one of the speakers. So you like this one?
No.
Okay, so let's start with anyone who has questions. Okay, back over there.
Yeah, so I have a question for...
Should we wait microphone or?
Should we just repeat?
You reiterate.
Okay,
Okay.
do that.
Sure, okay, so I have a question, I think, towards Mr. Felsen from Chicago. You were mentioning earlier about sort of convening a bunch of mayors from across the country, sort of like take the next step in sort of addressing vertical farms at a citywide level. So my question was, how do you all kind of determine and sort of find like a policy window in which you're able to make that opportunity happen? You're mentioning that politicians sort of are very ephemeral, like you need to act when it's hot, and I'm just wondering, how do you know when you're going to have this opportunity to do that?
Sure. So the question is, how do we encourage elected officials to come together and push forward the idea of building a vertical farm? I would start by saying a couple things. One is that what we suggested on the task force wasn't necessarily that a lot of mayors get together, but that a mayor convene key people in a particular city to get together to really figure out very collaboratively how to create a vertical farm. One reason to not get a lot of mayors together is that cities are in competition with each other, and mayors continually every day invest in something to try to stimulate some aspect of their city, either the economics or some kind of social situation. So I was talking to Dixon a few minutes ago and about the Swedish vertical farm that's happening. And he was saying that it's happening because whatever city that's in is in competition with another city. Yeah. So a vertical farm could potentially be a area of differentiation where one city could really attract a lot of leaders and thinkers to that city if the infrastructure is put in place. The other thing that I would suggest for this group is that we need to get a vertical farm shovel ready. And that basically means that we need to get some kind of a series of documents together, plans, so that when and if or when there are dollars available, that it's ready to go. So one lesson learned from the stimulus package a few years ago is that even though so many people had all these great ideas about sustainable infrastructure, none of them were shovel ready. What was shovel ready is basically fixing all of the existing infrastructure, all the highway infrastructure and so forth, and that was what got built. So we lost this opportunity, and the weed there being anyone interested in the next generation of sustainable infrastructure lost the opportunity to build because we didn't prepare for the opportunity to jump at the chance of having funding ready and available to go.
I'd just like to piggyback on that. Last year, Mayor Rahm Emanuel called a food summit, and he invited 10 mayors to gather around the issue of food, and it was something that hit from the ground all the way up to corporates, the Save-A-Lots, and the grocery stores, and Walmarts, and everybody else was involved. But at that table, because we were at the table and we gave a presentation and we spoke with everyone, and all of the mayors, we had people from Minneapolis, Baltimore, Milwaukee, and at the table there was a reflection moment where they said maybe we should have another summit within the next year or two to focus on very specific regional issues. If Indiana, Chicago, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, St. Louis or something sat at the table, figured out what were the policy issues that you mentioned during your presentation. The fact that there's fish farming was, aquaponics was not legal. And he was the mayor was stumped. He was like, how is this not legal? what goes into making this legal? How do we make it happen as fast as possible? And then it dragged on, and then it became, there's another issue that happened that took the attention. So if we could put it back on the table, I think there's a consortium here in Chicago that is going to be doing that in the near future, and figure out how we can have these synergies to have the same conversation. There are events where these policies keep coming up over and over, and people are sampling from different lessons learned, and we'd like to catalyze wherever we can.
This could be a question for the entire panel. I don't know if I'm in the minority here or not. I'm a current hydroponic grower, so I'm a for-profit entity. And I am interested in urban farming because this is my backyard. I'm only 100 miles away from here. But as a private person, I know some of these projects, Chicago and others, are involving multi-million-dollar projects and that type of thing. But with all your research and ideas, and Gotham Greens is a good example, what would a average Joe in the street, and I guess I better rephrase it, I hope I'm above average on the street, but what kind of things, I believe in free enterprise. I want to be given opportunity and then go from there on my business plan and do something that I can be profitable at in that regard. So on a scale of what all you are involved, what could you give me as a recommendation on what myself or others could do on a smaller scale as a private individual?
I can talk. Hi, so you have a greenhouse right now?
Yes, I have 20 hydroponic greenhouses.
So about how many square feet are they?
Total 55,000 square feet.
Okay, so you're already up and running,
Yeah.
selling in the market. So that, I mean, then you're already where, we are. Our just location is different than yours. For us, what's so good about you already having numbers is you can put together, if you want to switch it to being in the city, you already have a lot of the numbers that you would need to raise the money. You could probably go right to the bank for a lot of the capital needs that you would have because your numbers are good. And then I don't know if you have the cash flow from your own business to really, because what you would need to do is if you identified a site, you have your upfront costs of like your architecture, expediter, and structural engineering fees to get yourself a set of plans, and so you have all those soft costs to get it through the Department of Buildings, and with your own business, you could probably fund that. And then for the capital, you can go to a bank for a lot of the capital because they can sell the greenhouse. Really, it's just collateral for you. And then you'd kind of be ready to go. I mean, being on a building in the city doesn't necessarily cost more than being somewhere else. It's just a different location. And the plans have to be perfect to get the building approvals. But since you have real numbers, I mean, a lot, for us, we had numbers, but they were still from other places, because we didn't have working greenhouses, and we were able to raise the money through a combination of debt and equity. So I would think that you could do the same thing.
If your question is directed more towards moving indoors as opposed to having a greenhouse-oriented one, then I think it's helpful to kind of look at this from 30,000 feet and say this, as you can probably see from the presentations and the availability, that we're at the very beginnings of this. And so you may be ahead of your time, but not that far away. So we have things to work out. We have to improve the technology. We have to get it scaled up and operating properly in order to make it something I think that would address your need.
At Chicago State, we received a grant from United States Department of Agriculture, USDA, to create a curriculum development to increase participation of urban, minority, what have you, students that need a place to go in partnership with places like you. So that's one way you can anchor into that. There's increasing, I think NSF has a number of, they're looking at urban outreach initiatives that go between urban and rural because the lines of urban and rural are getting ever increasingly blurred. So it seems like there's a key moment right now to get involved into those types of projects because we're creating, I teach geography of food and hunger, and we have another class this spring, it's urban ecology. And then one of the requisites of that, somebody asked me about the research component of it, is how do they get hands-on experience in real practical scenarios such as small entrepreneurial endeavors. So seems like a ripe opportunity. And city colleges as well are also looking for licensing stuff. They're looking for people to do the workshops.
Hi, Nadia Saba. This is kind of for all of you. Jen, you kind of touched on this about zoning. And maybe Dixon, Emmanuel, I mean, I think all of you could maybe touch on this, but what are the issues with zoning?
I have a short answer.
In a city, in an urban environment with food production.
I have a very short answer for you. Why don't you rephrase it? What are the zoning issues for the state? Because Emmanuel and I actually testified to the state of Missouri as to whether there should or should not be the ability to farm within the city limits of any city in Missouri. Can you imagine? When you get a law that prevents agriculture at that level, that's pretty bad. So I think that we need to bring awareness of the advantages of urban agriculture in all of its forms to a national level, and I think that's what this meeting is all about. And I think we can do a lot about that by starting blogs, writing Congress people. This is a perfect time because of the elections and things of this sort. We've had no trouble in New York City convincing the mayor of New York and the city presidents of all the boroughs that urban farming is a good idea. But Jen, how many hoops did you have to jump through to get your first vertical high-rise greenhouse established?
I can give a couple examples.
Yeah.
Hi, Nadia. So yeah, there are, for example, in New York, it is like Dixon said, really specific to where you are. In New York City, what just changed for their zoning was, there's something called FAR, which is Florida Area Ratio. So first, if you're looking, let's say you have a map of New York City, you'll have different zoning codes. You'll have M1-1, M1-2, M3, and some are industrial, some are residential. They each have different FARs. So let's say you have, your FAR is 2, and you have a building. FAR is Florida Area Ratio. So let's say you have an FAR of 2, and you have a 10,000 square foot area. You can put 20,000 square feet there. So now if you're built, what we find is that often, if your FAR, if you already have 20,000 square feet, you can't add another story to that building without some sort of variance. You also, and there are a lot of buildings where they might have an FAR, say, of 2 and only have 1 story, so you could land on that. But typically the buildings that are really strong and good to land on are already overbuilt for where they are. So that's one thing that you run into. They are already at 3 stories and kind of have been grandfathered into the new zoning that went into that area. Other things that come up, you have to get through just even the whole permitting thing altogether without even just the zoning is what's going on in the building, what's going on with the building's C of O, does it have a C of O, is it in good standing, are there open violations on the building? A lot of stuff can come up on what those open violations are and how much will it cost you to fix those to start your construction. Means of egress off the building. Fire ratings, and even something we would have been open years ago, but we lost our first site. We had all the plans done, we're ready to go design, gonna land on this building. The last sign off that we needed for the DOB to give us our permit was the original piece of property we had bordered the MTA, so all the train lines that come into Manhattan, and they said, we need the MTA to sign off on your plans and we'll give you the permit. And the MTA said, we will sign off if you do all of these things. And it would double the cost of our construction, so we pulled out last minute and started climbing around roofs again. So stuff can really, as much as we've tried to now get everything, all our ducks in a row way ahead of time, stuff still comes up like pretty last minute, so it can be tricky.
just throw in one, the location in Chicago ran into an ordinance that said that you couldn't raise animals within the city limits, and I wondered for a minute, but they had an aquaponic facility, and fish are considered animals within that regulation.
Real simple, as you mentioned. It's like traditionally farming and agriculture is conceived of being on the outside of cities. That's where most people are. The DNA and genetic makeup of our cities reinforces that manufacturing is here, residential is here, this is here, this is here. And when you start overlapping them, it just causes people a lot of confusion. So they're like, where do the wastes happen? What's the water issues? What's the soil? What are the weights? And I think what's happening now is some of the developer world is starting, and also people have been holding land and property for 20, 30 years on the prospect of housing. Now that they realize that housing's not going to really be an option, they're starting to open up a little bit.
In all fairness to cities, I must add that when cities first began to evolve back in the 1800s and later into the 1900s, they had to find ways of getting farming out of the city to make room for all these other things, like making room for the Industrial Revolution, for instance. So in order for that to happen, they had to pass these rigorous laws. You go back and look at the laws, they date back to that time. So
Right.
trying to even find out what the law is remarkably difficult sometimes.
I was wondering if we could extend this question. We've heard examples a lot from North America, but we also heard examples from Japan. Can Professors Kondo and Kozai maybe add some comments on challenges of getting plant factories established in cities in Japan?
Well, according to the statistics, we have about 108 plant factories with artificial light only for commercial production or mainly leafy green. And the number is increasing, still increasing. And now a number of different companies, such as a real estate company, a construction company, as a Panasonic, investing a lot of money as a part of smart city concept or future-oriented city concept, because the government is investing and subsidizing a huge amount of money, especially at the east coast, northeast coast, or after the disaster of tsunami.
Just adding one other thing, I think it's interesting to look at what governments are subsidizing. So in the United States, what's getting subsidized is very inexpensive water, that very inexpensive energy, because the externalities of that energy are not taken into account. Externalities being emissions, essentially. So I think that one needs to think about turning that on its head, and that is what's happening in some other countries other than the United States. But until we collectively decide to subsidize differently natural resources, basically, we're going to continue to have this very non-sustainable practice, the non-sustainable agricultural practices in the United States.
Traditionally, economics has not really had much value of natural capital either. So, what is the value of water? I mean, is this diamond? Was it the paradox? Is it water diamond paradox in economic theory? And we know that water is extremely important to live. So, but they can't figure out how to put the right price on it. So now we're starting to have conversations. What is the value of water and light and all this other stuff that we've kind of overlooked?
New question?
Yeah, this is for Ray, Ed, or Professors Kondo or Kozai. Clearly, we need to, at least in my mind, we need to increase the efficiencies of these production systems if we want to be able to be profitable and move beyond leafy greens. Is this a matter of taking all of that research that NASA has done and all the research that you guys have done and just putting it together, or do we need some sort of technological breakthrough in order to make this happen? So I guess my question is, are there any low-hanging fruits technologically speaking, or is this really something that we need to change?
Well, one of the things that was just said was talking about the externalities, especially the subsidies. So the value of food may follow those same externalities, and that could be a significant change that would help with commodity crops. So if you think about all those other things that I think you want us to go to, they're heavily subsidized: water, energy, lots of things. So that's one possibility. The other thing is as you've probably gathered, I think lighting, the use of energy to produce artificial light that allows us to do these things, that's a significant cost currently, even with many technological improvements. But the opportunity is still there to change that considerably. And although LEDs have been around for quite a long time, that technology is only just beginning to accelerate. So we're seeing the costs of those have come from, I think the first bulbs I bought were like $90 for a 4-foot tube. And I saw some advertised, I would never buy them, okay, but for about $13, okay? So right now, and this is an interesting point, it's driven by quality. So when you want to buy bulbs in mass, they ask you, what quality do you want? Okay, and then the price is set accordingly. Well, that tells you that we're in the beginnings of that technological development. As that matures and there's more capacity, then I think that will also assist us. And I'm not including any technological improvements because diode efficiencies have really changed considerably.
Professor Kozai.
Okay, it is important to realize that the plant factory with artificial light does not require any heating cost because heat is generated from the lamp, and we have to cool the plant factory even in winter night in Alaska. So that's a very good advantage in extreme climate region. Also, we have to aware more than 50% of the light energy emitted from the dam is not received by plants, which is meaningless. So by improving a lighting system, we can reduce the cost for lighting by half very easily.
Could I also challenge the audience to come up with a list, maybe 20 or 30 different crops besides leafy greens that are profitable now? Because I know that green peppers are, and cucumbers are, and green beans are, and watermelons, and there's a bunch of other things. Gene is shaking his head. but I subscribe to Practical Greenhouse and Hydroponics, which is an Australian publication. And in it, they list a lot of commercial growers that are already up and running for those crops as well. So it's not fair to just couch the whole industry as a leafy green industry. I think it's got a lot of other things going forward, but it needs to improve on those levels too. I totally agree with that.
I have a comment to add that I heard earlier this morning in a talk discussing the label of organic. And I'm wondering if the market could be broadened in terms of coming up with some other label or modifying the requirements of what you call organic. If it is pesticide-free and herbicide-free and whatever side-free, but you're using mineral fertilizers, is this still a more desirable commodity for the market where the consumer's willing to pay more? Something like that could broaden the market maybe in times.
Right. The greenhouse industry, particularly high-end greenhouse industries, are getting together to actually market their value, saying that less input of pesticides and then something similar to be done for this segment of industry. There's actually a question from Chris. Has anyone measured the nutritional increase or decrease of those produce in this kind of production system? So that's related to the value of the products. Either from the panel, or either from you guys.
What's the question?
Has anyone actually measured and quantified, maybe compared the value, nutritional compound in the product compared to greenhouse or open field? How different are they?
We've done some limited comparison, and the comparisons are very equivalent in terms of nutritional content. But what's much more interesting is that we can use this controlled environment to actually change or enhance the constituents in the chemistry of the plant. So it's a real opportunity, but there's not much, there's a fair amount of in the literature about enhancing flavonoid contents and things like that, but there's not a lot of research that takes what our capacity to manipulate it is and then say what is the increase or the change that has occurred.
Can I just add on one quick idea on that? I think that there's got to be a scale question about health as well. So the fact that a produce from 1,500 miles away or however long away has the same nutritional content as grown locally, but the one that's getting trucked in from 1,500 miles away is not as healthy for the larger environment. There's just no way around that. So yeah, so I think that the scale, maybe there can be a scale issue in these certifications as well. I noticed that there's no local certification. Sometimes it says it, but it's not really a certification that one can bank on. Like when Jen is talking about going to a bank and talking about margins and other kinds of dollar things.
Can I reply to that? Because I think there is a bit of a misconception about the energy related to shipping. When you look at the energy that goes into producing agricultural products, it's actually a very small amount of the total energy that goes into shipping. So just because you ship something 1,500 miles, that doesn't mean that it has more negative impact on the environment than something that is produced locally, especially with electric lights, where you are probably using a lot more energy than you do with traditional agriculture. So we need to be really careful in making claims that are verifiable, because otherwise we have no credibility.
Mark. My name is Melissa. I'm from Cornell University. NYSERDA, which stands for New York State Energy Research Development Authority, actually sponsored a paper kind of research project published in 2008. It's a 216-page document with lots and lots and lots of tables, and we looked at how much energy it took to produce 5 different crops everywhere they could be produced and then shipped to New York State every way it could be shipped versus growing them here in New York State either in field production, well we're not here in New York State, but in New York State for field production or a greenhouse, because what our research group has done has really been growing controlled environment vegetable production, specifically lettuce and leafy greens. So that can be found on our website. Unfortunately, to echo what Mark said, that energy cost, what it cost the environment to produce that and ship it, it still cost less energy to grow something in, let's say, California and ship it to New York than it did to grow it in a greenhouse in upstate New York, which of course wasn't wonderful for us because growing local produce is what we encourage people to do. Now, what's not in that report that needs to be done by some social scientists or engineers, not social scientists, is to put a value on the benefit to the community and in terms of job production, whatever, and then also a health benefit for food and that's not wasted and that's fresher. But if you want that report, it can be on our website, cornellcea.com.
The last question. Obviously, it's getting.
My name is James Godsill. I'm one of the founders of Sweetwater Organics and the Sweetwater Foundation. Had there been a collaborative platform when we started in 2009, we would all be about $400,000 or $500,000 richer, because a lot of money was squandered because we did not have access to a global community of aquaponic practitioners. And I'm wondering if it is hopelessly utopian to imagine that a concrete outcome of this conference is a collaborative platform that starts with the people that are in this room.
That's all.